Hello to anyone watching this. Now that Mario Kart 8 has finished getting new tracks, again, it's nice to, take a step back and look over everything that the game has given us. And the best way to appreciate it all is to, of course, subjectively put it all in a line from worst to best. So today I just wanted to rank all of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's courses for the benefit of nobody other than myself. When there's like a large group of things, I just enjoy ranking them, you should see my takes on the alphabet. But before we start, I just wanted to establish exactly what I enjoy and what I look for in all of these courses. So basically this is the part where I explain exactly why I'm wrong about my rankings. Alongside obvious things like the aesthetic and the soundtrack, the main thing that I enjoy about a course is replayability. For me, this can come in several different ways, like with the sectional and route changing tracks, how there's something completely different every lap. Or a track can have some form of a split path. Like, even if I end up finding a favourite route, it's still fun every so often to just go a different road, And I absolutely love when a track has plenty of off-road shortcuts. Like, one of my favourite ways to play this game is to just only have triple mushrooms and stars on and just tear through the tracks as fast as possible. Like, that's really appealing to me, so it helps when I can be enabled. But all of these replayability factors aren't going to be the deciding metric for where all of these different tracks end up, even though for some courses it will definitely help them get way higher than they would be otherwise. But in terms of overall course quality, I personally don't think there's really any bad tracks, I'd put everything in C tier and above, at least a 7 out of 10 for everything. And the only reason a track will be at C tier for me is because there's just some slight annoyance with it. Like, there'll just be some aspect of the course that I think really obviously needs changing, to the point that whenever I play that course, it's one of the only things I can think about. But I do still enjoy playing the tracks down at the bottom. I just feel the need to make that really clear because of what I have put down there. And one last thing before I start, I am going to be talking about all of these courses under the assumption that you've played through them a good couple of times. Which, it's a statistical inevitability that you have, but I just want to make it clear. I'm going to be talking about the layout and the secrets and the theming as if they are familiar to you. So if you happen to feel alienated, you have been thoroughly warned. But that's enough covering my arse from criticism. Let's finally get on to the ranking, starting with my absolute least favourite track, Dolphin Shoals. I do appreciate a lot of things that this track does. It was the first track to have an underwater finish line, we love a trendsetter. It's just the underwater cave section just really annoys me. When others talk about this track, I notice how they always talk about how cool the blowing underwater pipes and riding on the back of an unagi eel is, but they never say how it actually feels to play. For me at least, these parts just feel so janky. Going between all of the different pipes feels so slow and unwieldy, and I feel like I can never get the tricks that I want to off of the eel. So when it feels like the track doesn't let me play on it the way that I want to, that's basically a violation of my human rights. Obviously this track is going to go dead last. Also, I don't like how when you go back underwater at the end of the track, the underwater variant of the music doesn't start playing, it only starts again once you cross the finish line. That really doesn't matter, I just find it really annoying. Also, I don't like how there isn't an underwater variant for the final lap music, it just plays the above ground version. But I'm just getting petty at this point, let's move on. Next is SNES Mario Circuit 3. Now this track isn't down here because it's an SNES track. It isn't down here because it's a Mario Circuit track. It isn't even down here because it's an SNES Mario Circuit track. It's down here because it is SNES Mario Circuit 3. Like, it's just the objectively worst Mario Circuit to pick from that game. Like, going through them, 1 is the track that started it all, which, for the theme of the Booster Course Pass, makes it valid to bring back in my eyes. 2 would obviously be based on its Mario Kart 7 version, which has the amazing glider ramp, and 4's never been remade. Obviously 4 never got remade in Tour, so that would normally mean it's less likely to appear, but it's basically just a mirrored version of Mario Circuit 3 with a few geometry changes. And they showed with the added flagpoles and general scenery that they were willing to change the geometry of this track, so why not just change it a bit more to bring back 4, you know? But that's really my only problem with the track. Like, it still plays really nicely and it's got plenty of off-road shortcuts, plus the fact that it's the only track in the game with no trick opportunities, gliding, underwater or anti-gravity. It does give it a distinctive spot in this game. So yeah, I do think a track like this does have a place in the game. I just wish someone else had that place, you know? So moving on, we have another track that'll need way too much explaining with Koopa Cape. So let me be as clear as the underwater pipe when I say that if I was ranking Mario Kart Wii's or 7's tracks, Koopa Cape would definitely land between 9th or 4th place. You know, my big issue here is with the scaling of the track. Like, I know that scaling was a contentious issue for quite a few of the Booster Course Passes tracks. It's just that Koopa Cape is the only one where I actively notice how much of a negative impact it has on the playability. Like, it's just so noticeably small. Like, this is what I'd expect from one of those joke mods, not the actual playable version of the track. So just for my own peace of mind, I am going to now go through the track from start to finish and point out every single way that the scaling made this track worse. Firstly, the jump over the pits near the entrance of the Goomba cave section has lost all of its danger. Like, especially when I was a kid, that jump had a lot of tension, you know, because it felt like there was a lot of ways to lose enough momentum to not make that gap. But now the pit is so insignificant that I'm finding myself actively slowing down going over it just to see if it's even possible to fall into, you know, it's quite pathetic now. Next is the removal of the glider ramp going into the river section, which I'm quite sure had to be taken out because otherwise you'd quite easily just smack into the back cliff wall. Like, all of the neat glider shortcuts that can be done in the 7 version probably would have been game-breakingly easy to do in 8 Deluxe. So it's sort of inevitable that one of the most fun parts of the track had to be removed. Next, the devs probably noticed that the entrance to the underwater section was a bit tighter now due to all the shrinkage. So to make sure everyone enters properly, they forced the carts to uncomfortably stick to the waterfall. Like, it really errs on the side of janky the way that was implemented. And it doesn't help that due to the field of view, the next left turn is almost blind the first time you play the track. And lastly, with the final section after the pipe, the first aesthetic issue is the fact that you can now see above the top of the waterfall, which I at least feel like I could never do in Wii, so it just feels a lot less grand to be able to see above the top of it. But the bigger gameplay issue is that the rushing water, which was one of the most risky yet satisfying cuts to take in Wii, is basically a non-obstacle now. Like, not only is the patch of water itself smaller, but it's almost impossible to even drive into it. Like, because of the scaling, the ramp leading out of the pipe section almost always shoots you directly towards the half pipe. It feels like you need to be going at an extremely awkward angle heading out of the pipe just to be able to hit the rushing water now. So there's pretty much no point to it, which is just great. Love that. So yeah, I just think this track was handled quite poorly in this game. The reason that it's not dead last is simply because it's Cooper Cape, and I just feel too bad to do that to it, you know? But moving on from that hot mess, we have more of a cold mess with Vancouver Velocity. Once again, I have no problems with any part of this track, you know? In a vacuum, all of the different laps are really fun. It's just the routing is so putrid. Even then, laps 1 and 3 are fine. It just all comes down to what they were trying to do with lap 2. It's the fact that you take the side exit from the stadium rather than the main exit. Like, not only is it extremely awkward navigating around all the Shy Guys just to get out of it, but in the tour version of the route, you just take the normal exit out of the stadium, just like in lap 3. So at that point it just made me wonder why they would make you just lose a turn like that, you know, why not just take the main exit? But then I remembered that the rest of lap 3 is shorter than lap 2, and then it all hit me. They gave lap 2 this shorter and more awkward turn just for the sake of making it overall more comparable in length to lap 3. And it's like, at that point, why did you even give it that routing? Why did it not have something more unique so that you could avoid this problem? Why did you have to make it just a basic Route 1, 2, 3 city course? Like, I totally understand I am making a mountain out of a molehill with this. It's just these sorts of things really annoy me, so I just want to take this chance to vent about it. Like, if I was in charge, I would have had the routing be more like Sydney Sprint. You know, have lap 1 be Vancouver 1, have lap 2 be Vancouver 2R, and then after you exit the stadium you go straight back in through the side exit, and then take the rest of Vancouver 3 back to the start, meaning that you can do Vancouver 1R for the final lap. And it's like, I don't have a reason to do this with any of the other city tracks. And like I said, all of these seated tracks are good to play on, I just have an issue with them. And my issue here is the routing. So therefore, this track goes down near the bottom. So yeah, those 4 bottom tracks have probably just taken up about half of the runtime of this video. But let's move on to the B tier tracks. The pacing from here on out is going to be a lot quicker, simply because there aren't any glaring issues to bitch about anymore. So yeah, it's pretty much going to be all positivity from here on out, you know? Just talking about what I enjoy about these tracks that puts them above everything before it. And while I will be suggesting some changes that would have been cool to see, they're basically just little suggestions. Like, not having them doesn't impact the track, like with the 4 I've just talked about. Also, the thing that will separate a lot of the tracks from here on out are simply their vibes. Like, the quality of a lot of these tracks to me are quite comparable at this point, so the only thing that will really separate them are just how happy I feel when I play them, you know? So yeah, if it starts coming across that I'm unable to properly explain why I think one track is better than another, it's because I am. But anyway, let's get back on with it, because somebody does still have to be at the bottom of this good pile. And for me, it has to be Wario's Goldmine. Like, I enjoy all of the changes from the original. Like, I'm one of the people who think the minecarts work better in anti-gravity. Plus the fact that the swoopers aren't nearly as annoying is really appreciated. I've just never really liked the atmosphere of this track. Something about it is just extremely gloomy. Plus there's way too many parts where the camera causes you to be completely blind to any potential items. It just feels kind of bad. But like I say, I still do enjoy this track overall, just, you know, it really does earn its place as the least good track for me. Next is Grumble Volcano, which, while it has the same atmospheric issues, it has way less annoyances than Wario's Gold Mine. The gimmick of parts of the track falling away is also similarly less intrusive than in the Wii version. I especially love at the end of the track there's a part that can fall away to open up an off-road ramp shortcut. Like, that's an even better use of the gimmick than in Wii. Just like I said, the atmosphere of this track I've never really enjoyed. Especially the whole notion of parts of the track uncontrollably falling away just makes me feel, you know, melancholic. So it's quite a deeply personal issue that puts this track this low. Next is Tokyo Blur, which a lot of people would put as their absolute least favourite city track. And in terms of actually playing on it, yeah, it definitely is. But I do feel like there's a perspective that people don't really take with this track, and that's the fact that this sort of feels like Tor's equivalent of the first Mushroom Cup track. From the basic happy atmosphere to the fact that each of the laps vaguely resemble a different starter course from previous games, even the fact that the song for this track is a remix of 3DS's circuit theme, it just feels like an intro track, and I happen to have a soft spot for an intro track as long as it plays well, and this one plays well. It's as simple as that, really. Layout wise, it would have been nice if lap 3 had a proper shortcut like the first two laps, but there's not really anywhere to slot in a shortcut in that route, so oh well. As for how good of a representation of Tokyo this track is, while I do understand how people can feel quite underwhelmed by it, I do think people forget that these developers are Japanese. Like, if I was tasked with designing London Loop, I would most likely come up with something quite boring. You know, the developers probably see Tokyo as quite a pedestrian and normal place. Like, they don't have the same grand idea of Tokyo that people outside of Japan do, so I feel like it's quite understandable that this track came out the way it did. I know that's really not a normal way to look at this track, but I just wanted to get it out there because it's how I've always seen it. You know, this is the most it is what it is track in the game for me. Next is Wii U Mario Circuit, which, while it is one of the best original form Mario circuits in the series, the fact that it had to stick to the shape of a Mobius strip does give it quite a few limitations. Especially the turn leading into the final item boxes is so awkwardly upward that I've ended up just missing the set a good number of times over my life. So yeah, while this is a good circuit track, I feel like it's just outshone by the more freely designed circuit tracks that we'll see later on. Next is Sky High Sunday, which, while I do think it's the worst of the oval tracks in this game, I do still think it has plenty of things to enjoy. Like, I love the free falling section during the second straightaway, because there's like so many different places that you can land. It's always fun to see where you can go. And also I really love the shortcut you can take by jumping off the final turn and just sort of hopefully falling onto the ice cube trays. But I do obviously have some critiques for the track, such as the ice cube trays. Like, I get that the whole idea of floating ice cream is quite farcical, but the ice cube trays are just sort of there. There's no real reason for them to exist other than to fill the gap between the last turn and the fridge starting line. Like, I think it would have been better if it was just one giant ice cube tray directly connected to the fridge with some cubes just perked up so you can trick off them. I think that would have been more interesting. Also, while I do love the free falling straight away, I don't love how blind it is. You know, I don't feel like I can really choose where I want to go until I'm already halfway down because I just can't see anything. Like, a better camera there would have been appreciated. So yeah, plenty of literal ups and downs with this course. But one thing I will always defend are the railings going up the stairs. Like, for me personally, I feel like the game taught me that I can spin off of any pole-shaped thing, so the railings giving you spin boosts just makes sense to me. But even if I can defend that, I can't defend this from being overall one of the lesser tracks in the game, even if I do really appreciate its overall use of physics. Next is Waluigi Pinball. Yeah, I am one of those Waluigi Pinball is overrated people. I deeply apologise. It's just like I said, I'm a massive shortcut fan, and since this track doesn't really have any, it inherently knocks it down a few pegs in my book. Plus, I just find the pinballs to be really annoying obstacles. Like, even though I know exactly how they're going to move around the table, I still feel like I get surprised and smacked up the arse by them every single time. Like, to me they just move so unnaturally, which just makes them inherently unintuitive. So even though I do love the theming and just how it feels to drive on this track, it's just those two main critiques I have just bring this course down a lot for me, unfortunately. Next is Daisy Circuit, which, while it is one of the most visually distinct circuits, it's also one of the least gameplay distinct circuits. Like, while I do love how the seaside town setting is utilised, with sections in the plaza and going around a lighthouse, I just feel like that came at the expense of truly fun track design. Even the track's big shortcut going through the building and off the gliding ramp doesn't feel that good because it didn't need to be a gliding ramp. That felt like it was just added so you could get a nice view of the sunset rather than actually thinking about how gliding would add to that section of the track. There is one gameplay change that I really like, which is the little ramp coming out of the tunnel that you can use to jump onto the side of the road and possibly dodge a red shell that can't reach you, but I've never gotten to use it for that purpose and I have no idea if it'd actually work like that. So yeah, while the vibe here is incredible and it does make me feel slightly bad for putting the track this low, it's just the overall gameplay doesn't really come together for me, you know. Feels like they thought of the setting, then built a track around it without even the luxury of the Tour City tracks getting multiple routes or something of that nature. Next is Twisted Mansion, which, while I do feel like it is quite overhated, it still definitely deserves to be this relatively low. Like, I do enjoy every part of this track, you know. I think the ghostly theme is utilised really well with the moving suits of armour and wavy floors, and I'll even defend the underwater section. Like, I think that adds to the track rather than takes away from it. I just wish there was more overall exploration of the mansion, like especially the interior part just after the glider section feels way too short. But I do still love how this track plays overall. Like, especially how there's so many split paths. Like, something about that just feels right for a haunted track. I just can't describe why. Next is Yoshi Circuit, which is definitely a victim of fatigue from me being able to play it for so many years at this point. Like, while I love the variety of shortcuts and set pieces that they managed to fit into this giant silhouette, it's just when there are so many other retro tracks that stand out due to the improvements that they've gotten from the new mechanics, it just makes this track feel less special to me. It just feels like this track was chosen to be remade because the purchase bonus for pack 1 of the Wii U DLC was coloured Yoshis rather than for any actual gameplay improvement reasons. But while its overall inclusion is slightly disappointing, it's still really fun to play on, you know. There's no complaints with the gameplay at the end of the day. Next is Bone Dry Dunes, and I feel like this is the best point to mention that I am somewhat of a desert track appreciator. Like I said, I just really enjoy shortcuts, and desert tracks often have plenty of sand to cut across, you know, how can I not love them? And Bone Dry Dunes is no exception, with a plentiful amount of sand shortcuts. But not only that, it has plenty of fun alternate paths as well. Like, I always enjoy taking the anti-gravity skeletal path, and even though it's not really consistent to get on, I really love the wooden pathway in the cave. The only reason the track is this relatively low is simply due to its atmosphere. Like, I really prefer a nice yellow sand desert. Something about the red sand here I find a lot more foreboding in a bad way. Next is DK Jungle, which, while I find it's a really fun track, I just have a few slight skill issues with it. Like, I always find myself catching the grass and slowing down while going for the first glider ramp, and then I find it's a bit too easy for me to fall off of the anti-gravity turn, and then I find that I'm misjudging my angle hopping onto the shorter route of the final turn. It's just all these little things. I'm probably just taking too fast or something like that. Like, I'm fully aware that I'm not good. It's just, I don't know, I feel like it doesn't provide the smoothest experience for me. Next is New York Minute, which is the first track that I don't really have any nitpicks for. I simply enjoy it less than every single track above it, you know? In terms of things that I really like about this track, I appreciate how on laps 1 and 2, after the Central Park visits, it turns into a split path. It makes the track feel a lot more open and like you're exploring multiple blocks of the city, even though you quite obviously aren't, you're just going around a building, but still, you know. And I really appreciate how different lap 3 is. Like, the final turn, looking out at the entirety of the city, is just a really nice set piece to end on. Next is Baby Park, which is obviously the only track in the series where there's really no objectivity in terms of critiquing it. It's really just about personal taste. And my taste is that, just like all the other tracks in this part, it's good, you know? Like, I think it has the perfect amount of chaos for what it is, but the most fun part for me is definitely lapping other characters. Like, not only is it fun to see how many times you can pass 12th place, but it gets really tense when you don't know if the person behind you is in 2nd or 7th, so when you get hit by something, you don't know if you're actually going to go down a place when someone passes you. I think that adds to the chaos in a way that I've never really seen anyone else appreciate, so I just wanted to shout it out. Next is Merry Mountain, which, similarly to Sky High Sunday, is one of the lesser regarded Tour Nitro tracks that has a specific part that I feel an odd need to defend. Because while I agree with everyone else that the climb up the mountain is the most interesting part of the track, I don't really agree that the final straightaway is that boring. Like, not only are there anti-gravity pegs to spin off of and coins being thrown down to collect, but there's always items on the track to avoid, you know? There's always something to keep interest, for me at least, so I think this track is interesting all the way around, personally. Next is DK Snowboard Cross, which just so happens to be another DK track that I'd love more if I didn't have skill issues with it. Like, I appreciate a lot of the changes to this track, especially at the mogul section. Like, I really prefer it not sending you quite as high so that you have more opportunities to trick during that part. It's just the gap cut section that I really end up struggling with. Like, I always enjoy trying to take it, it's just, even though I feel like I always do the same thing, I either land awkwardly or end up flying too far and having to be picked up by Lakitu. And don't even get me started about falling down the giant crevice instead. Like, I have no idea why this is basically only fall in the game where Lakitu takes an extra few seconds to come and pick you up. Like, that genuinely feels like it was programmed wrong, you know? But away from those two optional turns, this track is still a lot of fun, you know? Especially with all the half pipes. Like, this track is absolutely the best place in the game to mess around with the wild physics on them. You know, it's a great time. Next is London Loop, which, even though it hasn't used its home field advantage here to get too high up the ranking, it's still a great time. Like, I don't mind the first two laps being exact copies of the first two routes from the tour version because they were already good tracks to me, but I really love what they did with the third lap. Like, I would have been happy if it was just like the other two laps and was a copy of London Loop 3, but the fact that it takes you past Buckingham Palace again, I think is a way better introduction to the loose chain chomps on this lap, you know? Like, even though this isn't my favourite city track overall, I still just really appreciate how it did that little bit extra to make its route interesting. Next is SNES Rainbow Road, which, while it is my least favourite of the 5 Rainbow Roads in this game, it's still really good to me. Like, obviously the layout is great, but the star of the show for me here has always been the thwomps, because it's just fun to get as many tricks as possible out of the ripples that their hits create. You know, it just adds another layer to this track that I really appreciate. Next is Toad's Turnpike, which, while this is my least favourite traffic course in the game, I would like to take a minute to defend it from the boring allegations. I feel like I've heard too many people complain about the straightaways and that the traffic goes too slow, but I feel like that's a bit of an oversimplification about how this track actually plays. Like, between all of these cars, there's almost always coins or item boxes to grab. Like, you're encouraged to swerve between the cars and time it right so that you don't ram into the back of them. Like, I feel like the ways it expects you to deal with these obstacles are perfectly in line with a Shell Cup track. I don't really understand how people can have such a negative stance towards it. Like, I understand apathetic, you know, not really wanting to deal with the traffic at all and just wanting to take the best lines, but I just feel like this track doesn't deserve anything close to a negative reputation. Next is Ice Ice Outpost, which, while I really enjoy how it plays and everything, there's just always been something in the back of my head that's just made me not enjoy this course as much as I could. And just recently I realised that it all comes down to one colour. I genuinely think if the green path was red instead, I would enjoy this track a lot more, because I feel like that would give the paths a much better contrast to the icy setting, you know? Like, the mix of yellow and green here just isn't that visually striking compared to what the track design is going for, and therefore it just has a slightly worse atmosphere for me that brings it down. Away from that, I really do enjoy the course, you know, I love how all of the different ice shortcuts are really satisfying despite how tricky they are. The idea of an entirely multi-path track in general is really fun. It's just, like I said, there's just something about that green. Like, I know I sound entirely obsessive about it, but like I said, a lot of these choices are coming down to vibes, and that green just does not have a good vibe for me. Next is Sunset Wilds, which, apart from losing its entire gimmick from its previous versions, I just think this track's a bit of fun. I love how there's something new after pretty much every turn, you know, it feels like they did the absolute most they could with this setting. But yeah, no matter how fun this track's layout is to me, it still would have been a few places higher if it had its dynamic sunset from before. Next is DK Mountain, which, I'm just sorry, it's never clicked with me the same way it has for others. Like, I enjoy the setting and the flight to the top of the mountain is always nice, but I've never really found any other part of the track to be that overwhelmingly great. Like, all it is to me are a few fun ramps, a series of relatively interesting turns, a cliff jumping shortcut that I can never be bothered to take, and the wriggly bridge that's a lot more fun than before because you can jump off of it, and that's it, really. Next is Berlin, which, while track design wise I see it on the same sort of quality level as London Loop, it's brought up a few places simply by having the best song in the entire Mario Kart series. But I do still love what this track design is going for, especially with the use of moving traffic and how you interact with it on all 3 laps. And while the use of womps is really morbid in context, I do still love how it helps keep the otherwise quieter final lap a lot more dynamic. Just overall, even though I haven't ranked this in the middle of the city tracks, I do think this is the most average city track quality wise. Like, there's nothing really bad, but at the same time nothing really outstanding about the track, apart from the music of course. Next is the first of the traditional section tracks with N64 Rainbow Road. And just to put my stance out on the matter, I do think this course works out better as a section track. Like, it might have been nice if more of the circular turns were treated like the one on section 3, where it got turned into a figure 8 to make it a bit longer, but I still think what we got is better than if we had to do 3 or even 2 full laps of it. Speaking of section 3, I do find it to be the most underwhelming of the 3 sections. Like, after the first 2 both had fun bouncing chomp segments, the third section just being a straight dash to the finish just feels a bit less exciting. But I do enjoy this track being here, you know, keeping up the new tradition of having the Lightning Cup end with a subsequent Rainbow Road, and they did do all they could with it in the end. Next is Bowser's Castle, which, while I understand how it's a lot of people's favourite in the series, this one to me just made me realise how formulaic all of the Bowser castles are getting. It just feels like instead of trying something new, it just had to tick a load of boxes. Like the castle being represented by a few random corridors, and a giant mechanical Bowser appearing, and a slightly too long section at the end outside of the castle. You know, it all just adds up to not really impress me as much as other people. Like, I do appreciate the different use of the mechanical Bowser, and I really love the reference to Super Mario Bros. 3 with the laser statues. I just wish these Bowser Castle tracks would represent more of the homely aspect of a castle. I think I'm just longing for a fresher take on a Bowser's Castle track, that's all. You know, I just want to drive on Bowser's bed, among other things. Next is Amsterdam Drift, which I enjoy in pretty much every aspect. There's just one tiny part that knocks this track down a few places. Like, I love the more rural setting, especially the tulip field part, and I love the trip into the canal, and I even enjoy the routing of lap 3. It's just the one part of the canal where you use an airstream to jump up onto a boat for an extra item box. It just never works for me. Like, no matter how I approach it or position my cart as I leave the water, I always just end up catching the boat and missing the boxes. It's so annoying. And so whenever I play this track, I just end up thinking, oh god, I'm going to have to do that bit of the canal, aren't I? You know, that just brings it down for me, unfortunately, but I still do love pretty much all of the rest of this course. Next is Toad Harbour, which I will always appreciate for being pretty much the definition of a cozy course. Like, from the music to the happy sunny atmosphere, it's just such a nice course, you know? It also helps that pretty much all of it is split into multiple paths. And what's great about these alternate paths is that even if you misjudge a turn and end up on one of them accidentally, they're still all nice, you know? There's no shame on being on any of them. It just helps the course feel even more happy. My favourite path has to be the anti-gravity section, mainly because it was one of the first showcases of anti-gravity back during E3 2013, so it just really sticks in my mind. But yeah, even if this isn't the most exciting or fleshed out track, it's always a joy to play on, which is all you can ask for, really. Next is Mario Kart Stadium, which is another track that I simply find cozy. It has a really lovely nighttime aesthetic complemented with fireworks. It has some really great off-road shortcuts, and for whatever reason it has one of the best glider sections in the entire game with the corner cut you can take during it. So yeah, for the first track in the game, even though it's not going to be the most compelling, I just think it's neat. Next is Paris Promenade, which for a while I didn't really find it the best first impression of the Booster Course Pass, but over time its relative simplicity has really grown on me. Like, I appreciate how on this track you use most of its different paths on every single lap, compared to the others where certain paths are cut off to only use on one lap. The only real gripe I have is that I wish that it set you in reverse on the second lap, and then use that same little section to turn you back around and do the last lap forwards again. But that's mainly just because I'd personally prefer to do a different route every lap compared to doing the same route twice and then something different, you know? But I still just appreciate this track for ending up becoming increasingly varied as more city tracks release. You know, it's weird how it all works out. Next we're going straight from the first city track to the last with Madrid. In terms of this being the last city course, it's, for me at least, not at all penalised by any sense of apathy towards the constant stream of cities that appeared during the Booster Course Pass. You know, I never found it boring. I always enjoyed seeing what new things each city would bring, you know? The only real problem that I have with Madrid is just that there's a couple small parts that feel slightly more cumbersome to get through. Specifically, both trips to the plaza feel slightly off for me, simply because the jump into them is a bit blind, meaning that I'm often taken aback by how much space all of the seating and the wiggler takes up, so I can't take the exact line that I want to. Also, it would have been nice if the gallery section was a bit longer, mainly because it got its own remix of the track's music. You know, why not utilise it a bit more? But I do still overall enjoy this track for the amount of interesting set pieces that it managed to fit in. You know, this was a real strong end to the city courses. Next is Sky Garden, which is obviously not this high due to its quality as a remake. Like, yes, this track should have absolutely been more faithful to the layout and road colouring of the original version, and if it was, it probably would have been a lot higher up the list. But as its own Mushroom Cup difficulty level course, I still think it plays well enough to end up here, personally. Next is Wii U Rainbow Road, which, while I'm always more than happy to defend its honour, it still should have been a lot more. Like, I've always really enjoyed the space station theming of this one, you know, compared to pretty much all of the other Rainbow Roads that are just sort of floating colours in space. This one felt like it had a much more proper setting to it. And the part that's actually set in the space station has always been my favourite, with its position changing speed boosts and conveyor belts. It's always felt really cool and high tech, you know? But yeah, the actual Rainbow Road parts aren't nearly as exciting. You know, what do you have? A figure of 8 and then some paths that you can jump between and a final big turn with speed boosts, and that's it. Like I said, this track is really cool for what it is. I just wish the space station theming extended a bit into the rainbow parts, you know? If it had that, it'd definitely be a lot higher, but oh well. Next is Toad Circuit, which, don't worry, I can definitely make an attempt to explain this. I just think this track plays really well, personally. Like, yes, it would have been absolutely better if we got any of the other tracks from 7's Mushroom Cup instead, but for what it is, I just appreciate it. Also, as you can tell, I think this track is better than Mario Kart Stadium, which, while this track obviously doesn't exactly have the same quality and aesthetics or gliding section, I just think overall it plays a bit nicer. It all comes down to the shortcuts for me. I just think they're of higher quality on this course. Even though they may be a bit basic, I just appreciate them. Especially how you can chain the shortcuts off of the ramp into the final pipe-ridden sand section. And even though the graphics are quite rightly ridiculed, something that I find is really underappreciated is the lighting and time of day on this course. Something about the late afternoon, nearing sunset time of day is just so happy for me. And that's all it comes down to, really. This track just makes me happy compared to all the ones before it, you know? It's as simple as that. Next is DS Mario Circuit, which you can pretty much just copy and paste everything I just said about Toad Circuit here. You know, it has the happy time of day and loads of lovely shortcuts, but I do think this track wouldn't be as high as it is if it didn't have its new forest section. Like, I don't know how normal this is, but I can run through pretty much any Mario Kart track in my head, except for the original version of DS Mario Circuit. Like, that big turn after the pipe was just like an empty void for me. Like, it felt like something should have been there, but no, it was just a massive turn and a squiggly straightaway, couple S-bends and you're done. So to actually have something there this time really helps this course be actually memorable. And yes, while this slot should have absolutely been taken by any of Tour's other DS remakes, apart from DK Pass that would have been really stupid in Wave 4, I'm just really happy with what we got here, you know? Next is another link in the chain of reasons that I shouldn't have any credibility with Wii Rainbow Road. Like, I totally understand why this is a favourite for people, I just don't have the exact same sense of nostalgia for it, I guess. Like, I always found the mandatory half pipe a bit nerve-wracking because of how it just doesn't work sometimes, and the best parts of this track just don't stick out to me the same as other best bits of Rainbow Roads. But this is still a fun track and a great remake, especially with its use of floaty anti-gravity physics. You hopefully know me by now, I do love my shortcuts, and to have some added in just due to the new physics of the track is really nice to see, you know? This is just a great track overall. Next is Riverside Park, and this is really where I am starting to run out of anything to critique. This is just a great remake of Tour's already great remake of this track. Like, I don't think anyone would have thought to put Patuis onto the track, but they feel so natural. And the cave, of course, adds plenty of variety, and the track plays nice with loads of good shortcuts, just no notes. Next is Moonview Highway, which, as the course that put Booster Course Pass speculation on its head, this track did have a lot to prove, and I think it proved itself. Like, with all of its speed boosts and random item boxes scattered about, it works perfectly as a very fast-paced traffic course. And the fact that the boost pad's positions change with each play, it keeps the course interesting for me. And I'll always love the alternate cliffside paths you can take at the beginning of the course. You know, it helps give the track a sense of exploration, which I always really enjoy. You know, even though I wasn't really wanting this to come back in the Booster Course Pass, I'm so glad it did in the end. Next is Daisy Cruiser, which, even though all this remake has over the 7 version is the pool Goombas and an actually nice looking dining room, that's all it needed really. Like, I've just always really appreciated this track for how many interesting things it can fit into a basic figure of 8 layout. Also, I love how the Clampies now always have item boxes in them, because it makes the aquarium path a lot more appealing to take. This version just has so many subtle but great tweaks to truly make it the best this course has ever been. Next is Sydney Sprint, which while it did end up losing its title of Best City Track as the second half of the Booster Course Pass came around, it's still an amazing course for me. The thing that helped it stand out for so long was definitely its routing, because even though it probably would have ended up in about the same spot for me had it done a simple routes 1, 2 and 3 for laps 1, 2 and 3 layout, the way that lap 2 basically just uses the second and third route to make sure that the final lap can be done in the opposite direction is really cool to me. Like, I understand how some can feel that lap 2 is a bit long, but I always just thought it flowed really well. Like, just overall this track is a really great shake-up of the city format for me. Next is Cooper City, which while yes, this city track does have a much more standard layout, I do think this one still has a lot of fun to it. I never really understood why this track was so polarizing. Like, it has a great atmosphere and setting, it has a firm but fair layout, it has plenty of great shortcuts. You know, there's nothing to really hate about it for me. Like, maybe it was a bit of a weird pick for the Wii U DLC packs, but I still think it more than earned its spot in the end. Next is Moo Moo Meadows, which definitely wins the award for most unrecognisable Wii remake. Like, yeah, the layout and pretty much all of the hazards are the same, but just the beautiful sunrise setting makes it pretty much unrecognisable for me. It's just such an incredible remake on that metric alone, you know? Plus I did already enjoy the layout, so it's all positives here in the end for me. Next is Rome Avanti, which even though it didn't start the final cup of the game, this track will always have cozy finale vibes to me. With its cheery nighttime setting, and the fact that it's set in Mario and Luigi's home country, and the really calming music, this just felt like sort of a happy end to the city courses for me. And the layout, of course, is amazing as well. I'm someone who thinks that the Colosseum was used the right amount personally, like, I don't really think we needed to see any more of it. Like, the main city has plenty of interesting parts to go through for me, especially the park and the shortcut through the market stall. Just make it feel so cozy, you know? Also, special shout out to the gorgeous fountain, which definitely wins the award for body of water in this game that I want to swim in the most. Next is Sherbet Land, which, if Rome is the coziest city course, this track is definitely the coziest snow course. It just feels like they took every opportunity to make this track feel joyous. You know, from the deep night sky with Aurora Borealis, to all the various sources of light both above ground and underwater. This track just always makes me smile, it's lovely. The cherry on top though has to be the glider ramp. Like, not only is it put in a really nice shortcut, but it just gives genuinely one of the best views in the game personally. Next is Los Angeles Laps, which is undoubtedly the lone shining star from the Cherry Cup for me, even though it didn't even crack the top half of my ranking. I think what I appreciate most about this track is its sense of variety. Like, not only are all the sections distinct layout wise, but theming wise as well. You know, you can't say that about any of the other city tracks, and I really like that about this course, you know? I'm even happy to defend the oil field segment as fun to drive on, with all of the moving oil rig parts causing split-second decisions on what path you want to go down. I just really appreciate it. Although, again, obviously not enough to get it to the top half of the list. Next is Water Park, which is definitely one of those courses where I just have no idea why anyone can hate it. Like, it might have been a better track if there were a few more rides incorporated into its design, but it did the absolute best with what it had in my opinion. Like, the subcoaster is a really nice use of anti-gravity, the carousel spices up an otherwise normal off-road shortcut, and the Wario wheel is a really interesting obstacle for a gliding section. Just considering that this is in the Mushroom Cup, I simply think this course did all that it could. Next is Wario Stadium, which just personally has always been my preferred track with this piece of music. Like, even without all of the changes in this remake, I always thought this was a really fun and varied track. But with its changes, the variety has just been cranked up to 11. Like, I don't even think this track needed an anti-gravity underwater or gliding section, but now I just can't imagine the track without them. The only change I really don't like is with the time of day. Like, I really think this track worked better with a nighttime setting, but that doesn't stop it from being a great course overall. Next is Cloudtop Cruise, which, like, I don't think they'll ever need to make another Skyfiend course again. Like, it's not going to get better than this. I just love how it uses every possible Skyfiend set piece so perfectly, especially the Stormy segment. My only real wish with this course is that the airship segment could be a little longer. You know, instead of just going out of a cannon from the first ship, maybe you could jump into the interior of the second one and be shot out of one of its cannons into the thundery section. But like I said, that's just a wish. This track is still amazing. Next is Yoshi Valley, which, considering my obvious admiration for split paths, this track should probably be a bit higher. But it's just the fact that the bridge path is so obviously the best, it makes the overall gimmick feel a bit weaker. Like, I only ever use any other path if I'm feeling bored. So when I think about this track, all I can ever think of is the bridge path, and based on that metric, it's still a really fun track. I personally think the best bit of the track has nothing to do with the split paths. I especially love the final part of the track, you know, after the giant rolling egg. It just has so many fun and satisfying opportunities for shortcuts. So, you know, even if it's not in the way it intended, this track still does pander to my tastes in the end. Next is Boo Lake, which, even if it's not my favourite GBA remake in the game, it's still for me definitely the most improved. I just love that not only is there actually a lake now, but that you get to dive into it, with the excuse being that the obviously rickety boardwalk has given way and submerged. Like, that just makes so much sense. It helps that it's really fun to play on as well. I think it might be scaled just a bit too small, but it's not in a way that actively impedes how much I enjoy it, you know? Next is Excite Bike Arena, which may or may not be this high purely because of the variety provided by its changing layout gimmick. But even if this track had the same layout each time, I'd still get a lot of joy from it. You know, I get way too much serotonin from chaining tricks together. My only real issue is that the final straight before the finish line is always the same. Like, there's probably some weird balancing reason for it to never change, but I don't know, it just makes each layout feel less distinct when you know it's always going to end the same way, but at least that final part's still fun, you know? Next is the third part, in my case, for the Mushroom Cup being the most underrated in this game, with Sweet Sweet Canyon. I just love everything about this course, you know, even down to the conspicuous looking soda used for the underwater segment. To me, it all just comes together so perfectly. There's no extremely standout parts of the track, which is probably why it isn't higher up. But similarly to Water Park, it does absolutely all it can for being in the Mushroom Cup, and I really love it for that. Next is Piranha Plant Pipeway, which has done extremely well considering that I don't think this version is quite as good as the original. As you can tell, I do still really love it overall. I just feel like the physics of it worked slightly better in 7, and the underwater section just doesn't look quite as nice to me. I personally don't remember any giant underwater facilities in the underground Super Mario Bros. Levels that this track is meant to be based on, You know, this change really never matched with the theming of the course for me. Also, I don't like how the gliding section afterwards sends you out at a lower position, meaning that you can't fly over the castle wall like you could in 7. But don't mind all my bitching, like I said, this is still an incredibly fun course to play on, especially the underwater segment. Like, despite all of my moaning, I do think it plays way better overall. Next is Cheap Cheap Beach, which, even though it may not be the most memorable track in the game, that just makes it even more fun when you play it again and realise how good it is. The underwater area is definitely what makes this track feel so good, because it really helps open it up and it leads to so many nice shortcuts and secrets. Even away from that, additions like the glider section or corner cut in the jungle area help this to feel like a really great remake of a quite understandably overlooked track. Next is Choco Mountain, which is one of those tour remakes that as soon as I saw it, I was like, I need this in 8 Deluxe. Like, the cave and glider section adds such amazing variety to what, for me at least, felt like a really one-note track before. I did enjoy driving on it before, it's just with all of the changes it feels like such a more alive setting now, you know, it's a place that you want to actually go and explore for yourself unlike before, and I just love it for that. Next is Mute City, which even though for me this track will always live in the shadow of Big Blue, there's still a lot of things that I love here. Like how the boost pads give an incredible sense of speed when they're all hit, which also makes it a compelling choice whether to go for them or to grab some coins from the coin pickup strip, or whatever it's called in this game. And the floaty physics help the big jump at the end feel so open, where there's so many different places it feels like you can land. You know, even if we didn't have Big Blue, this would feel like the perfect F-Zero representation. Next is Thwomp Ruins, the amazing finish to the amazing Mushroom Cup. The thing that puts this on top of all the other Mushroom tracks for me is that it feels like they did absolutely everything they could with this concept. Like, when I think of Ruins, I think of exploring, and since there are so many alternate paths on this track, you know, I feel like it accomplishes that. I especially love all the pillars and other stones that have fallen down to form shortcuts. Like, that feels so perfectly thematic. I don't know how else to explain it, you know, it had one goal, and for me at least, it simply overachieved it. Next is Shy Guy Falls, which it does work out quite well that this is coming after Thwomp Ruins, because I feel like I have the exact same praises for it. Like, hitting all of the speed boosts possible going up the waterfall and then quickly rushing back down feels so incredible. And of course the rest of the track is amazing as well. Like, the setting makes me want to explore it, and all of the secrets and shortcuts perfectly fulfill that. Everything just comes together so nicely. And even though this and Thwomp Ruins aren't my favourite Wii U Nitro tracks, they are definitely the first ones that come to mind when I think of that list. Next is Dragon Driftway, which funnily enough is this high because I really enjoy drifting on it. Like, this is just one of the most satisfying courses in the game to drive on for me. You know, I feel like an actual professional hitting all the right lines on it. My favourite part to get right has to be hitting all 5 of the anti-gravity pegs in a row, which it does help that they make cute little noises as you hit them. But the rest of the track is just as satisfying to drive on for me. I am aware that I've been entirely focused on the drive feel for this track, but I just feel like that's what it deserves the most credit for. Next is Electrodrome, which, unlike some other courses that are brought down because of one oddly specific part, this track is brought up because of one oddly specific part. That being the noise-making steps at the end of the split path section. Like, on its own, that's an incredible feature for a track to have. But the really fun part comes from the fact that the green path steps are placed slightly higher than the pink path steps. So I always enjoy going down all of the green path steps and then quickly jumping onto the pink path's final steps so that I can hear both the big cheers. It's just the little things in life, you know? But the rest of the track is still obviously amazing. I really love how the track takes full advantage of the club setting by providing some of the trippiest visuals in the entire game, and it's always fun during the second glider section to try and cut as much of the final corner as possible. It's just a great time all around. Next is Singapore Speedway, which is definitely the city I was most looking forward to playing in 8 Deluxe, and it definitely did not disappoint. At first I was kind of nervous finding out that there was an extra starting line in the middle of one of the track's routes, but I really had no reason to be worried because the pacing on this track is amazing. Like, the efficiency at which you are taken to all of the set pieces within this track is amazing, and it helps that all of those set pieces are really fun to drive on. Like, I know it's not the most contested field, but this track easily has the best use of conveyor belts in the whole game. And Chinatown is so distinct from the rest of the track that even though it's not the most interesting part layout wise, it's always fun to go through. I do slightly wish that lap 1 also started with a drive through Chinatown, but at the same time I do understand why they wouldn't go for that, because having a trip there on all 3 laps would probably feel a bit stale at that point. But yeah, even though this didn't end up being my favourite city track in the end, I am still so glad it was worth all of the hype. Next is Hyrule Circuit, which, while I can't deny that this isn't the best representation of Legend of Zelda overall, I still just really enjoy how this track plays. Like, even though it rarely ends up being worth my time, I can't help myself from trying to activate the sword shortcut in the castle every time I go through there. And I always thought the foresty part near the end with the reskinned piranha plants and supers was really cute, even if I do somehow always end up on the path that gets attacked by multiple Deku Barbas. But of course, we love our shortcuts here above all else, and the grass cuts on this track, especially in the opening field section, are just so nice to take. So while I do hope potential future Zelda tracks aren't as generically themed as this one, at least for what it is I can still have fun with it, you know? Next is Coconut Mall, which, while I do think some of the changes in this remake are overhated, there are some other changes that I feel like never get called out. Like, even though it was done better in the 7 version, the escalator should definitely have some sort of clear indication about what direction they're going, just for the sake of slightly visually impaired players. And I always found the previous iterations of the moving car section to be extremely annoying, so I do prefer how they work now, even if I wish they did spin more often. Like, while I understand why both of these things could be contentious for people, I've just always preferred to look at them as misunderstood. I have 2 personal gripes with this version. Firstly, the little ramp on the side of the road as you exit the mall has been removed, which was quite needless, like, who was it hurting? And secondly, the scaling just feels a touch too small. Like, I feel I get flung way too far going off of the ramps in this version compared to before. But no matter how many genuine issues there may be, at the end of the day it's still Coconut Mall. It'll always be fun to drive through and explore this track, you know? Now it's finally time to move on to the A-tier tracks. For me, these are like 9 out of 10, amazing in basically every way courses. So to start this section off, we have Tick Tock Clock, which is an impeccable remake of a rather underwhelming original course. Like, to me the original felt like a load of clock related set pieces stitched together with no real rhyme or reason, but this version just makes everything make sense. The best change has to be with all of the clock hands, because they work so much better as shortcut providing ramps rather than quite annoying obstacles. And I prefer how the pendulums don't make you crash, and I love the gliding section you can take over the spinning cogs. It just felt like they took every opportunity possible to make this course really fun, you know? Next is Royal Raceway, which is one of several courses that are this high purely because of their amazing vibes and amazing corner cuts. The only possible contention I can have with this track is obviously the fact that they closed off the castle, but personally I think I can understand why they did that. Because when you play online you obviously get disconnected if you stand idle or drive backwards. They probably didn't want anyone who didn't know the course well enough to accidentally meander into the castle and get unfairly disconnected. Which at that point they could have just opened up the castle for offline races, but I mean they chose to put the castle up an unreachable ledge in this version, so they clearly just wanted no one to ever try and get to it, so oh well, we can just enjoy the rest of the course for the loveliness that it is. Next is Donut Plains Free, which despite having an incredibly plain theming, it just plays so impeccably that I can't help but adore it. It has to be the underwater sections that push it over the edge for me. Like the fact that at multiple points you're able to just take a dip in order to cut a corner more tightly or take an extra grass cut. It just makes this track feel so free and open, and that just makes me really happy. And even after that there's a fun Monty Mole section where you pretty much always get an opportunity to trick off of a dirt trail. I just don't get how more people can't appreciate this track, you know? Next is Calamari Desert, the first desert track in this game to truly shine. Like, even if this was just a copy of the 7 version, I would have still loved it for all of its amazing sand cuts and optional gliding ramps to avoid the train. But the fact that they actually incorporated Tor's second route that gives a fresh perspective on the track and the train as an obstacle, just no notes. This is the definitive version of Calamari Desert. Next is GBA Mario Circuit, which to me is just the absolute definition of a happy place. Just everything about this track is so nice. You know, obviously it's really good to drive on. I especially love how satisfying the glider ramp is to take. And I really love the anti-gravity section because it's one of those changes that I at least wouldn't really think about adding in. But now I just can't imagine the track without it. Like, actually getting to play Super Circuit last year, it was kind of disorientating to see how bland this track was before gameplay wise. But even if I can't be nostalgic for much about the Super Circuit version, I can definitely be nostalgic for this version's music. Because it was always used at the end of the Wii U DLC trailers, I quite associate it with just how cool it was to be getting DLC for Mario Kart, you know? So this track just has entirely positive vibes for me in every conceivable way. You know, how can I not love it? Next is what I quite comfortably call the second best city track in the game, with Athens Dash. What I love about this track is that even though it's primarily set at the Parthenon, it takes full gameplay advantage of that. You know, there's a lot of verticality and exploring ruins. You know, it feels like you're genuinely touring the ancient parts of this city. I don't know how to properly describe it, but the fact that you do things like take an extended glider section just to get back up the hill at lap 1 and then you just sort of throw yourself off the side of it at the beginning of lap 2, it just makes it feel like, compared to other city tracks, the setting came first and they sort of designed the track around it rather than just sort of chucked all of the different iconic locations into a pre-built track, you know? It also helps that the track plays amazingly. My favourite part has to be the trek up the hill during lap 3 with all the boulders and stuff. It's just a really cool set piece, you know? But yeah, this track does so many things to make it so distinct from pretty much every other city that I can't help but call it one of the best. Next is Squeaky Clean Sprint, which is a tour track that I didn't really want, but I absolutely needed. Like, it looked okay in the teaser trailer for Wave 5, but when I actually played it, I realised that this track has absolutely everything that I look for. It's really open, it has so many secrets, more stuff opens up with each lap, just everything about it takes complete advantage of the setting and scale of it. My favourite part has to be the shelf under the mirror. Like, every time I get on there at the start of lap 3, it's just so satisfying, you know? There's just one small section that prevents this from getting up to S tier for me. It's the drain section. Like, I do enjoy its overall layout and even how its look contrasts the rest of the track. I just really don't like how the flowing water shoves you along. Like, I feel like I don't get any control over what I do at that part, and it's just quite unsatisfying compared to the rest of the course. But, you know, away from that, this is still an utterly incredible track. Next, we're getting on to a streak of 6 tracks where, even though they're often maligned, based on what I enjoy about tracks, you can hopefully understand why they're this high for me. Starting with Rosalina's Ice World. Like, I just love a lot of what this course does, you know? It has some nice split paths that are quite thematic for an ice track, and the changes like the half pipes and the extra off-road shortcut before the end are really cool to me. And yeah, it would have been nice if this course had more Galaxy references, but at the same time I can't really think of many that could be incorporated that aren't just straight up callbacks to the ice levels from the Galaxy series. The only one I can really think of is maybe incorporating the Cosmic Observatory into the first turn, like you either drive around it or you use a mushroom to drive off a ramp through it, you know? But apart from that, I've just always found this to be quite an interesting take on an ice course, I'm afraid. Next is Dry Desert, the culmination of all of the things that I've praised about this type of track. There's so many sand cuts, I just love it. But away from that, I do feel like all of the changes in this version I can quite easily defend from criticism. Firstly, I do think the Oasis section does bring value to the track, you know, I think it's quite fun. Plus I just appreciate the ironic value of having it in a track called Dry Desert, you know? I find the removal of the tornadoes to be quite understandable, because Mario Kart 8 is designed to never really stop you for too long, you know? At worst, an obstacle will just flip your kart over once, then you can keep going. So for the tornadoes to keep you in the air for several seconds, it just wouldn't really be compatible with how Mario Kart 8 is designed, you know? And the removal of the monster in the sand pit is similarly understandable, because in this game, obviously Lakitu comes and picks you up as soon as he can. So I don't really know how he'd be able to do that from the jaws of a giant piranha monster. They could create like a special animation for him getting you out of there, but again, that would make it slower, and that's not what the game's going for, so it's just, again, not compatible with how this game works. And at that point, it's fair to argue that if so many things need to be taken out, why even remake it at all? But this track probably fulfilled the need for both a GameCube track and retro desert track, so we got what we got, and I really like what we got, so it's up here for me. Next is Shroom Ridge, which, as a Mario Kart DS child, I can't help but see this as a cozy Sunday drive course. Like, the fact that it plays so well, especially with its added shortcuts breathing a lot of life into this new version. Like, that's practically irrelevant on my placement of this track, next to just how happy it makes me feel. There's no aspect of the track that I can specifically pin down as making me feel like that, although obviously the music and sunny atmosphere do contribute. This track just brings me so much joy, I just can't help but love it, you know? Next is Rock Mountain, which is up this high because both of its main gliding sections just make it the most open track in the game. The way that you're not directed straight back onto the track and you can just go off in any direction you want and take a shortcut by landing on the grass while having mushrooms, or by tricking off of some wind on a pipe to get extra distance to reach a further part of the road, it all just feels so nice. It helps that I find the non-gliding parts of this track really fun as well, especially going back up the mountain. Like, that was already fun to play in 7, chaining all of the boost pads together, but I think it plays even better in anti-gravity. I just think everything about this track comes together really well. Like, yeah, the gliding physics were better in 7, but I still think you can do all that you want to in this version, so I still love it. Next is my choice for best city in the game, with Bangkok Rush. Similarly to Athens, I love how it feels like the track was designed around the city's landmarks. But what makes Bangkok feel a bit better for me is the sheer variety of set pieces on offer. Like, the gliding section through the giant swing and Democracy Monument has to be my favourite part out of any city track. But every other part of the track is amazing in its own right. I'm even happy to defend the giant turn going through the car park because, you know, we're supposed to be in a city, and when I think of a city, I think of something like a car park, you know? It helps it feel more proper in its own way. I could go on about this track forever. It just has absolutely everything I wanted out of a city course, so I can't help but call this the best out of the bunch, personally. Next is Cheeseland, which I don't know if I'll personally ever be able to categorise this as a desert course, but I'll always love it like one. With its fun corner cuts and chainable glider shortcuts, it's all just so lovely, you know? The only issue I can really have with this course is that all of these shortcuts lead to the most prominent example of sandbagging in the game, which my only input on that discourse is that baggers need to grow up. But yeah, this is still just an amazing modern reimagining of this course. Even though having played the Super Circuit version now, this version has lost a bit of its charm, but I think it's made up for in other ways that make it just as good, in my opinion. Next, we're getting back into the more traditionally beloved tracks with Sunshine Airport. And like, there's really nothing else I can contribute to all of the positive praise this track has gotten. You know, it's just an amazing use of an unconventional setting for a track. I think the only real under-discussed part of the track is the use of planes. Like, I love how there's multiple ways you drive through them in a really short space of time. It helps add to the chaotic and crowded feeling that this track should have. My only real nag with this track is that it might have been nice if before going back into the main building at the end there was like an extra turn where you have to drive through the baggage claim area. Like, basically you come out of the conveyor belt that you see at the end of the course, but that's just me wanting this track to be longer for the sake of enjoying it more, you know. This is still just an utterly incredible course. Next is Peach Gardens, which you can probably guess by now is this high, mainly because of the fact that you go backwards on the final lap. Like, it just adds so much to an already amazing course, you know? What else can I say? I just want to make sure that I'm not contradicting myself though, because back about 5 hours ago with Paris Promenade, I said that I would have preferred if the second lap went backwards and then the third lap went forwards again, but I don't think that applies here, you know, because this is a properly retro track. You sort of want to have the original experience for as long as possible before having a nice shake-up at the end. But away from that, I think what I appreciate most about this version is how it's a lot more coherent as a garden. Like, there are so many extra trellises and trees and more well-kept flower beds. It all just feels so nice. and it's exactly how I would design a garden if given the opportunity. So yeah, this is pretty much a perfect remake, you know? The only issue is that they took away the illusion of choice from the first turn because you can't go all the way around the Mario statue anymore, but that's very much just water under the bridge for me. Next is Bowser Castle 3, which, even though I knew from the moment I saw it in tour that it was coming to 8 Deluxe, I could not prepare myself for how much fun I was going to have with this version. Like the way that all of the slightly awkward parts of this track, like the straightaways and freeway split path section, are all kept but updated to be really fun, is just a testament to how amazing SNES remakes can be. And it's another one of those courses where even if I don't end up going the route that I really wanted to, I still have fun. You know, this track is just pure fun. Next is Wild Woods, which is another track where it feels like they did absolutely everything they could with this concept. Every part of this track is just so unique and fun, but my favourite part has to be ascending the tree at the start of the track. Like, they could have had the starting line be at the landing pad in the Shy Guy village, and that would have worked well, but the fact that they knew how cool it would be to start in anti-gravity going up the tree is just perfect. Just the vibes here feel so special to me. Especially the music makes this course feel like a joyous send-off to the Wii U version of the game. To me at least. Next is Mushroom Gorge, which is a track that for me just feels better and better with every iteration that it gets. It's mainly to do with the physics, like this feels like a good balance between the complete uncontrollability of the Wii version and the almost on rails to me nature of the 7 version. It also helps that this has a nice combination of features from the Wii and 7 version. You know, especially the mushroom shortcut at the beginning of the track was really nice to see return. Like, I genuinely didn't think that would ever be brought back since it wasn't in the 7 version. There is one very serious thing I need to talk about with this track though, because I've seen a lot of people say that the mushrooms don't look as bouncy anymore, and I really don't know what they're talking about. Like, to me they resemble trampolines more than ever. They look like they have a way more appealing boing in this version. But even if the mushrooms looked wholly uninviting to jump on, this track will still just be one of the all-time greats. Next is Ninja Hideaway, which is a track that no matter how many times I bump into a wall or feel like I unfairly fall off a ledge, I just can't help but absolutely adore it. Like, the way that such a unique theme is utilised perfectly for track design is just so amazing. The fact that at multiple points you can find a secret path and fall away from it only to stumble into a completely different secret path just gives such an amazing feeling of exploration. Like, there are no notes. It just all comes together so nicely. Like, literally the only thing that keeps this from S tier is the harshness of some of its turns. But away from that, this is pretty much a perfect track for me. Next is Waluigi Stadium, which, before compiling all of these rankings, I really wouldn't have thought this track would get this high, but it just goes to show how amazing of a remake this is. It's helped by the fact that it has the Wii version as a base to go off of, which had some of the best uses of half pipes in that game, which very much continues to be true here. The alternate paths that you can access using them just gives them so much more purpose, and it helps that the paths are really fun to take on their own. Like, every time that I get to glide towards the finish line, it feels so earned. Just everything about this track is done the absolute best it can be. Next is Super Bell Subway, another course with so many different paths that it's almost overwhelming. Even though I do have a favourite path, that being the one with the gliding ramp, I still never feel bad having to take any of the other routes. Like, I find it really cool that the trains are not only an obstacle in the sense of you crash out when you hit them, but the fact that they encourage you to go down different paths to avoid them is just so nice. It just feels like every possible path through the subway, from the safest routes avoiding everything to straight up hopping onto the train, was considered while this course was being made. It just makes this course feel so open. Like, there's no other way I can describe this track other than scientifically engineered to appeal to my tastes, you know? Next is Snowland, which is another course that I think was scientifically engineered, this time to be as endearing as possible. With the chirpy music and the nice frozen lake setting where we get to see the penguins in their natural habitat, just everything about this course is so happy. Also, it obviously plays really well, like especially taking the shortcut through the trees is always satisfying. But this is just one of those tracks that really shouldn't be this high, but it just makes me so happy that I can't help but shove it into the top 10, you know? Next is another purely joyous GBA remake with Ribbon Road. Like, the fact that this track went from not really having a setting to having one of the most ingenious and fleshed out settings in the entire series is just so nice to see. And of course, the track is amazing to play on, with each of the 3 distinct sections having their own standout moments to me. Although naturally my favourite part of the track are the ramp shortcuts you can take during the anti-gravity section. Like, they are genuinely the most satisfying shortcuts to take in the game when I can actually do them right. But even when I do mess them up and have to be picked up by Lakitu, that just means I get to spend more time on this track, so it's a win-win either way, you know? Next is Melody Motorway, which, the fact that this is so high up, despite this remake having basically no changes from the original, is just a testament to how incredible this track is. Like, yeah, this remake probably would have been better if all the piano turns were made anti-gravity or something, but it just didn't need that, you know? This is already such an incredible execution of an incredible concept. The only thing that's slightly off about this version is that the bouncing music notes' eyes are constantly squinting when they're on the ground, which is quite off-putting, but away from that, just no notes. Next is Maple Tree Way, which it slightly takes me aback how out of my 4 favourite Wii courses that always just so happen to come back at every possible opportunity, that this one always ends up being my favourite. It's probably because while the other 3 have much more bombastic concepts that stick out to me overall, this track simply plays the best, you know, every single part of it just makes me smile. And this is the definitive version of the track for me, because similarly to Mushroom Gorge, this has the best of both the Wii and 7 versions features, you know, it has the half pipes and the gliding sections back. And yes, I can defend having the gliding section instead of the wavy bridge, because straight after that part there's a very open section of the track where there are so many different split paths, and I feel like with the wavy bridge, the sort of angles it can send you off, you didn't really get to properly choose where you wanted to go. So the gliding section fixes that because you can just sort of float towards whichever path you fancy. So yeah, to me this is the best version of the best Wii track that just so happens to be themed around the best Mario Kart character. And with that out of the way, we can finally get on to the S tier tracks, which are just, to me, pure Kino 10 out of 10. And if it seems like I've been struggling to come up with different ways to praise the tracks before, you ain't seen nothing yet. So the first cream of this crop is Piranha Plant Cove, which I was already so excited to play this track in 8 Deluxe, and it still massively exceeded my expectations. Like, I may not have shown it at some parts, but in general, I really love underwater themed tracks. So to essentially get 3 of them in one, I just can't help but adore it. And it helps that they play super well. My favourite bits have to be on lap 1 when you're jumping back into the water and you can just use the floaty physics to cut some of the corners. Like, that is just so satisfying to me. The only possible thing that I'd want to change about this track is that in lap 1 in the tour version, the final couple of turns had cloisters in them, which would have been nice to see here, but considering that cloisters in this game always have item boxes in them, there was probably some balancing reason that they weren't put in here, you know? But I just love this track so much. You know, even if tour tracks are never seen in mainline Mario Kart again, I will just always be so thankful that this course got its rightful time in the spotlight. Next is my final, potentially contentious choice in this ranking, with Animal Crossing. Like, as a regular track, it is sweet enough. You know, it plays well, it has plenty of good corner cuts, it's a really efficient tour of the entirety of an Animal Crossing village. You know, it's just nice. But it is, of course, the season gimmick that puts it up this high for me. Like, the fact that there's not only aesthetic, but gameplay changes with each of the different versions. Like, this is straight up a 4-in-1 track for me. There is no other way that I can see it. What also helps me love this track is that I have a very normal 5,000 hours in New Leaf and New Horizons. So, considering how many times I've seen the leaves change from yellow to orange and seen the first snowfall of the winter, playing this track just reminds me about how happy that makes me. So yeah, even though this track does have quite a glaringly unfair advantage, you know, I just can't help but call it one of the best. Next we have my favourite non-sectional track in this game, Yoshi's Island. Which is kind of funny because when I first saw this track in the Wave 4 teaser trailer, I thought this was going to be a sectional track. You know, the fact that so many different biomes were being represented in one course, like, no way you can fit that all into just one lap. But they did, and it worked out so perfectly. Like, not only does each part of the track play incredibly well, but they flow into each other so naturally. Everything about this track just makes me so happy, especially of course the cloud shortcut. On the very rare occasion that I get to take it, it is always so satisfying. Just even though they didn't need to make a Yoshi's Island themed track, let alone one that was so much of a loving tribute to the series, I am just so glad that they did, and I really hope that other games can get a track of this quality in the future. So, even though my ranking has been filled with presumably a lot of shocking, confusing and most likely upsetting placements, I have a really predictable and standard top 3, starting with 3DS Rainbow Road. Like, I've just always thought of this as an incredibly special track. You know, compared to all of the other Rainbow Roads that are pretty much just floating in space, the fact that this actually incorporates celestial bodies is just so nice to see. And it helps that you get to do exactly what you'd want to in all of these set pieces, like having to narrowly avoid asteroids and doing massive floaty jumps on the moon. You know, that's what I want out of space exploration, essentially. And the fact that at pretty much every part of the track you can see the road in the distance wrapping itself around a different planet, you know, it gives such an amazing grand scale to the whole thing. But I can't believe I'm still having this problem this high up the list. There are allegations that I need to defend this track from, because there are some people who say that the track looks too blue, but I've always been able to see all of the other colours alright. Like, you can see them in the pictures that I've provided, you know. I've never had that as an issue. I just think people are looking at the fact that the sides of the roads have like these blue edges to them and are just assuming that that's the rest of the track. But even if this was Blue Road, I'd still love it just as much, you know. This track is just endlessly fun to me. Like, the only way a Rainbow Road is ever going to get better than this is if it basically just does the same thing but takes you through different celestial bodies. But now we're going from my favourite Rainbow Road to my favourite crossover track with Big Blue. Like, I don't know much about F-Zero, and I definitely don't know why the devs felt compelled to give it 2 tracks in the Wii U DLC, but oh my god am I so glad they did, because everything about this course is impeccable. I just love how they take every possible opportunity to make you go faster, while still making it a compelling course to drive through. And of course the floaty physics help make it even more fun. Like with all of the shortcuts you can take by jumping off the course and gliding over to another part, it almost feels like slow-mo emphasis to make it more exciting. It's quite a weird but really cool effect. But my absolute favourite part of the track has to be the beginning of section 3. Like chaining all of the boost pads while staying on the green conveyor belts while the saxophone solo starts blaring in. It's the most exhilarating part out of any Mario Kart track. Like, that's all I can describe this track as, you know, purely exhilarating. Like, we do not need another F-Zero track. There is no way they can do one any better than this. But no matter how much love I have for this track, at the end of the day, it can't beat the amount that I have for Mount Wario. Like, the way that it uses the section format to do something that you truly can't do with a normal lap-based course is just so amazing. And the feeling of momentum in this track is truly unbeatable. Like, no time is wasted going from set piece to set piece. My favourite one of which is, controversially, the forest section, because I just love how all of the split paths and numerous trees to avoid give it a sort of scrambly feeling. Like, that's what I want out of a track that's so fast-paced, if that makes any sense. But of course I do love every part of this course, you know, nothing in the game comes together quite like this. Like, reaching the finish line truly feels like the end of a massive journey. And with that, all of the courses have been sufficiently ranked, so now I can get on with ranking the cups. I'm going to be ranking them in 2 different ways, which I will explain using the obvious pick for last place, the Cherry Cup. It's quite simple really. The numerical rank is the one where I add together the placement of each cup's tracks and put them in a line from biggest to smallest. And the vibe rank is the one where I look at the cup as a whole and think about how much I enjoy these tracks being together. It is a much less objective metric, and that's why I'm going to be showing the cups based on their numerical ranks. It's just, like I said, a lot of the tracks were ranked based on their vibes, so it just feels right to do the same for the cups. I'm not going to be in the rating over this because it would be genuinely too mentally taxing to try and think about something to say about each of these cups. So I'm just going to let it play out montage style with the Booster Course Pass credit music in the background to hopefully give it a bit of emotional weight, you know? Oh, and I did all of the calculating myself. I did get an A in GCSE Maths, but please don't get upset if I made any mistakes. And any numerical ties are going to be broken by the vibe rank. So please enjoy. wasn't that a fun way to conclude things? Just like I said at the start, I simply enjoy ranking things, so this was a lot of fun to do, even if it was a bit painful trying to make sure that I kept varying up my adjectives from sentence to sentence. But yeah, if you have any questions or concerns, do let me know. Just a few months ago I was really on board with the idea of a second booster course pass, but now that I've put all of this time into ranking all the tracks, I'd really hate for this video to become outdated, so I do hope Mario Kart 8 is dead now. But bye bye, have a nice day.